Kashmir's fragility has more complex reasons. To limit what is happening in J&K solely to the impetus created by a Talibanized Afghanistan could cost India dear. Fear is the prevailing sentiment across many parts of Kashmir today. It has, in turn, led to comparisons with the situation that existed during the 1990s and the early years of the 21st century. In the past few weeks, several civilians as well as security and armed forces personnel have been killed by terrorists, some of the latter being labeled as hybrid terrorists, though it is not clear what this phrase signifies. Ground realities. A predictable reaction to the situation has been the exodus of Hindus, especially of the Kashmiri Pandits, and of migrant labor, fearing for their lives and their future. Side by side with this, an impression has been created of increasing support to militancy, though it is unclear whether this is indeed the case. However, as in all situations of this kind, it is apparent that impressions often appear more real than actual ground realities. Latterly, Kashmir had managed to stay away from the headlines despite concerns expressed in different quarters about the disciplined democracy being practiced ever since the dilution of Article 370 and the restructuring of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir (J&K) into two union territories. In the absence of an agile press, it has not been possible to fathom the intensity of protests against the existing order, and whether they constitute a rejection of the changes effected. Incidents of violence have, however, continued. Notwithstanding this, given the hullabaloo in the immediate aftermath of the changes effected in August 2019, a degree of surface calm seemed to prevail, not very different from that which existed previously. Whether this was peace brought about through controlled conditions, or otherwise, has been difficult to discern. Given the recent recrudescence of violence, it is, nevertheless, evident that the situation remains fragile. Whether this means that the changes effected since August 2019 were merely a triumph of wishfulness over prudence, an overestimation of belief on what was possible ignoring the history of several decades past, and the failure of many previous attempts to change the status quo, is hence worth examining. Pakistan apart. More important is what could possibly be the reasons for the revival of aggravated violence in Kashmir. While assessing the ground situation in Kashmir, Pakistan has always tended to be a factor. It is, however, again possible that the lessons of the past on what needed to be done to effectively checkmate insurgency from across the border or inflame Kashmiri opinion might have gone unheeded in the euphoria of having succeeded in altering the character of J&K and Delhi establishing a degree of direct control. Promises made and an unwillingness to use the time and opportunity to create fresh opportunities for dialogue with communities in Kashmir, allied with reputational interest in not accepting that the many steps taken were inadequate to defeat the machinations from across the border, could also, perhaps, be additional reasons. By this reckoning, Kashmir might well seem, in some remote way, to reveal the same attitude as many post-conflict, pre-modern, hybrid societies with mixed populations. It would imply that in the case of Kashmir, making a transformation to a more stable society will always prove difficult. In addition, Kashmir has difficult neighbors such as Afghanistan, Pakistan and China, which leaves little scope for experimentation, a true test for decision-making of any kind. As violence escalated in J&K, it became commonplace to link it with the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan. This could, however, be a highly simplistic answer to a more complex situation. In the current context, geopolitics is something that cannot and must not be ignored. The sudden surge in violence in Kashmir needs a more careful evaluation of the facts rather than simplistic answers. It is a fact, for instance, that India's worldview has steadily expanded, especially in the Asia-Pacific region, and several, including some relatively unknown, tension points have emerged. All these will need to be carefully assessed before coming up with an answer. More so since India is wedged between two known antagonists, Pakistan and China, has a Talibanized Afghanistan as its neighbor, and there has been a resurgence of international terror groups, notably the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. The China factor. Of particular consequence in this context is China's continuing cooperation with Pakistan in many matters, its growing assertiveness in regard to its territorial claims, vis-a-vis India, its opposition to the prominence given to India by the West in both Asian and global forums, etc. All these have further helped cement the nexus between China and Pakistan. Intertwined with this is again the battle raging for spheres of influence between China and India, which has intensified under China's President Xi Jinping. The latter is intent on establishing an Asian system in which China sits at the summit of a hierarchical regional order. All this is altering the ground realities, and it is worth considering whether Kashmir is emerging as a pressure point in this context. Intelligence is critical. What it all boils down to is the need for hard and better intelligence. Hard intelligence is critical to avoid misperceptions and miscalculations. The recent history of the world is replete with stories of intelligence failures, misperceptions and miscalculations, which had led to grave situations, and which might well have been avoided had there been better intelligence. The serious miscalculation about Iraqi President Saddam Hussein possessing nuclear weapons based on wrong intelligence led to unnecessary involvement by the United States and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in Iraq, followed by an unfortunate train of events that continues to haunt the world to this day. As tensions between India and China, and between India and Pakistan, intensify, the need for hard intelligence is thus vital to be able to control the train of events and avoid any serious miscalculations. What is common to most, perhaps all, intelligence agencies, irrespective of the degrees of competence, is their limited capacity for imagination, viz., to imagine future events and possibilities. Intelligence agencies, by and large, are adept at providing insights about yesterday's threats rather than future ones, especially those that exist just beyond the horizon. Moreover, as intelligence agencies become more wedded to technology, they need to realize that advances in technology tend to be a double-edged sword insofar as intelligence is concerned. It should not negate the need for improved analysis and also how important it is to provide decision makers with information on what is taking place in the minds of their opposite numbers. In the extant situation, Indian intelligence agencies must avoid the kind of lapses of both imagination and analysis displayed by Western intelligence agencies some years ago, who misread, misunderstood and failed to anticipate the role of Saeed Qutb and his preachings, which later set the stage for the 9/11 attack on the Twin Towers in New York and other targets in the US. Had they understood what Saeed Qutb preached, viz., that martyrdom was a necessary part of 20th century jihad, they would not have underestimated the influence exerted by Islamist theology on the terrorist mindset. It is, thus, important that the missing dimensions of intelligence in most cases, viz., thinking imaginatively and improved analytical capabilities, receive the close attention of India's intelligence agencies. Only then will it be possible to understand the nature of current events as a precursor of future threats. This is important to ensure that they do not ignore signals that may not be all too obvious at this time, and keep chasing more obvious and current aspects. Too narrowly focused intelligence requirements, limited to current events such as, for example, tensions with China on the border, or Pakistan's attempts to push in irregulars, and aid the Lashkar and Jash elements to cross over into India, may prove self-defeating. The arc of intelligence needs to be much wider, and Indian intelligence agencies such as the Intelligence Bureau, the Research and Analysis Wing, as also the National Security Council Secretariat should ensure that they have the necessary capabilities. Linked to this is also the danger of intelligence adjustment, viz., avoiding challenging conventional assumptions, which could undermine their ability to provide a more accurate picture of the larger threat. Today, when India faces problems all around it, to limit what is happening in Kashmir solely to the impetus created by a Talibanized Afghanistan without fully analyzing all the facts could cost the country dear. M.K. Narayanan is a former director, Intelligence Bureau, a former National Security Advisor and a former governor of West Bengal.
India will achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2070 and reduce 1 billion tons of carbon emissions from the total projected emissions by 2030. the country will bring down the carbon intensity of its economy by more than 45% by 2030. Delivering the national statement at the World Leaders Summit of COP26 in Glasgow, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said, India will bring its non-fossil energy capacity to 500 gigawatts by 2030, and it will fulfill 50% of its energy requirement through renewable energy by 2030.
क्लाइमेट चेंज पर इस वैश्विक मंथन के बीच मैं भारत की ओर से इस चुनौती से निपटने के लिए 5 अमृत तत्व रखना चाहता हूं, पंचामृत की सौगात देना चाहता हूं। पहला, भारत 2030 तक अपनी नॉन फोसिल एनर्जी कैपेसिटी को 500 गीगावाट तक पहुंचाएगा। दूसरा, भारत 2030 तक अपनी 50% एनर्जी रिक्वायरमेंट रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी से पूरी करेगा। तीसरा, भारत अब से लेकर 2030 तक के कुल प्रोजेक्टेड कार्बन एमिशन में 1 बिलियन टन की कमी करेगा। चौथा, 2030 तक भारत अपनी अर्थव्यवस्था की कार्बन इंटेंसिटी को 45% से भी कम करेगा। और पांचवा, वर्ष 2070 तक भारत नेट जीरो का लक्ष्य हासिल करेगा। ये पंचामृत क्लाइमेट एक्शन में भारत का एक अभूतपूर्व योगदान होंगे।
Mr. Modi said the country constitutes 17% of the global population and its contribution to the emission has remained only 5%. But today, the entire world admits that India is the only major economy which has delivered on the Paris Agreement in letter and spirit. The Prime Minister added that climate finance and transfer of low-cost technology has become even more important when India has resolved to move forward with a new commitment and new energy.
मुझे खुशी है कि भारत जैसा विकासशील देश जो करोड़ों लोगों को गरीबी से बाहर निकालने में जुटा है, जो करोड़ों लोगों की ईज ऑफ लिविंग पर रात दिन काम कर रहा है, आज विश्व की आबादी का 17% होने के बावजूद जिसकी एमिशंस में रिस्पांसिबिलिटी सिर्फ 5% रही है, उस भारत ने अपना कर्तव्य पूरा करके दिखाने में कोई कसर बाकी नहीं छोड़ी है। आज पूरा विश्व मानता है कि भारत एकमात्र बड़ी अर्थव्यवस्था है जिसने पेरिस कमिटमेंट पर लेटर एंड स्पिरिट में डिलीवर किया है।
Mr. Modi said all climate finance promises have been empty ones so far, and developed countries must ensure $1 trillion climate finance at the earliest. Mr. Modi also opined to track climate finance just like we track the progress of climate mitigation.
हम संकल्पबद्ध होकर हर संभव एफर्ट्स कर रहे हैं, परिश्रम कर रहे हैं और परिणाम लाकर दिखा रहे हैं। फ्रेंड्स, आज जब मैं आपके बीच आया तो भारत के ट्रैक रिकॉर्ड को भी लेकर के आया। मेरी बातें सिर्फ शब्द नहीं हैं, ये भावी पीढ़ी के उज्जवल भविष्य का जयघोष है। आज भारत इंस्टॉल्ड रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी कैपेसिटी में विश्व में 4थे नंबर पर है। बीते 7 वर्षों में भारत की नॉन फोसिल फ्यूल एनर्जी में 25% से ज्यादा की वृद्धि हुई है और अब ये हमारे एनर्जी मिक्स का 40% पहुंच गया है।
We have a report covering the summit.
Today is the last day of World Leaders Summit of COP26 and the Prime Minister will attend several events. He will participate in leader-level event organized with the COP26 presidency around the theme of clean technology, innovation and deployment. One of the important events is the launch of Global Green Grids initiative. Besides, Mr. Modi along with Australia and UK Prime Ministers will launch a new initiative for infrastructure for resilient island states. It is aimed at creating coalition for putting in place infrastructure that can withstand disasters and lessen economic losses in island nations. Several bilateral meetings including with Switzerland, Finland, Israel and Nepal are also scheduled to take place on the sidelines of COP26. Divakar, AR News, Glasgow.
Prime Minister Modi met his UK counterpart Boris Johnson in Glasgow on the sidelines of COP26. Mr. Modi congratulated Mr. Johnson for successfully organizing the COP26 and for his personal leadership in championing global action for climate change mitigation and adaptation. Mr. Modi reiterated India's commitment to closely work with the UK on climate finance, technology, innovation and adaptation of green hydrogen, renewables and clean technologies. During the meeting, the two Prime Ministers reviewed the implementation of the Roadmap 2030 priorities, particularly in the trade and economy, people-to-people, health, defence and security areas. Counting of votes will be taken up today for 3 Lok Sabha and 29 Assembly constituencies spread over 13 states and the Union Territory of Dadra and Nagar Haveli, whereby elections were held on 30th of October. The Lok Sabha seats where by-elections were held are Khandwa in Madhya Pradesh, Mandi in Himachal Pradesh and Dadra and Nagar Haveli. All 3 Lok Sabha seats fell vacant following the death of sitting MPs. The by-elections for 29 assembly seats were held in 13 states including Assam, West Bengal, Madhya Pradesh, Himachal Pradesh, Bihar, Karnataka, Haryana and Maharashtra. India's COVID vaccination coverage has crossed 106 crore 79 lakh mark. Out of the total vaccination, more than 73 crore 43 lakh vaccine doses have been given as the first dose, while over 33 crore 36 lakh doses have been administered as the second dose. The Health Ministry said more than 47 lakh 79,000 vaccine doses were administered till 7 p.m. yesterday. Union Health Minister Dr. Mansukh Mandavia has said that India has administered the first dose of COVID-19 vaccine to 78% of the eligible population and the second dose to 35% of the eligible population of the country. In a tweet, Dr. Mandavia termed it an extraordinary feat of an extraordinary nation. He congratulated all, saying that we are rapidly progressing on our path to defeat the virus. Mrinal Kotere of Hyderabad has topped the National Eligibility Cum Entrance Test NEET UG 2021 exam. He scored a perfect 720 marks in the NEET exam. National Testing Agency NTA declared the result and paved the way for admission in medical colleges across the country. As many as 98,000 students have qualified as NEET cut-off marks were dropped from the previous year. Enforcement Directorate has arrested Maharashtra's former Home Minister Anil Deshmukh after more than 12 hours of questioning in Mumbai in connection with a money laundering case. Deshmukh, who had stepped down earlier this year from his post amid a row over bribery allegations against him, was refused relief by the Bombay High Court on Friday as he had appealed for the cancellation of the summons by the probe agency. And in T20 World Cup, England beat Sri Lanka by 26 runs in Sharjah last night. For England, Josh Butler scored 101 in 67 balls. Earlier, Sri Lanka won the toss and chose to field first. Today, South Africa will take on Bangladesh while Pakistan will clash with Namibia.